What would you do if the man who signs paychecks, commands fear, and never asks twice, looked you in the eye and said, "Starting today, you're my girlfriend, not tomorrow. Not as a joke, today." This story is different because it isn't just about power money or a fake relationship. It's about what happens when a woman who's been surviving for too long is offered one dangerous week inside a life she was never supposed to touch. It starts on a rainy Chicago night with wet hair, a half-finished shower, and a phone call that turns Olivia Bennett's world upside down. One late-night summons, one penthouse office, one request that feels impossible to refuse. Stay with me because this story only gets darker, deeper, and more addictive from here. If this opening hooked you like the video and comment where you're watching from, by the time the elevator reached the lobby, Olivia Bennett could still feel Adrian Moretti's voice in her bones. "Starting today, you're my girlfriend." The words had not sounded flirtatious. They had not sounded playful. They had landed with the clean weight of an order quiet, and controlled the kind of sentence that changed the shape of a life before a woman even realized she had agreed to let it. Outside, Chicago was slick with rain. Headlights smeared across the pavement. The wind off the river knifed through her hoodie as she stepped onto the sidewalk, and for a moment she just stood there, staring at the black town car, waiting at the curb as if it belonged to another woman. Not her. Not Olivia Bennett, who spent her mornings color-coding Adrian Moretti's schedule and her nights arguing with insurance companies on behalf of her younger sister. Not Olivia, whose rent was due in 9 days and whose savings account looked more like an apology than a plan. Her phone buzzed before she made it halfway home. A wire transfer notification flashed across the screen. $25,000. Her breath caught so sharply it hurt. Then came the text. "Thank you for saying yes. Tomorrow night. My place. We rehearse." She read it twice, then a third time, her thumb hovering uselessly over the glowing words. Rehearse. As if this were theater. As if pretending to belong to Adrian Moretti were no more dangerous than memorizing lines. As if she had not spent the last 2 years learning the shape of his moods from the sound of his footsteps and the tension in his jaw. As if she had not noticed the way men older and more powerful than him lowered their voices when he entered a room. As if she had not gone home at night and hated herself for wondering what he looked like when no one else was watching. By the time she let herself into her apartment, her wet sneakers squeaking against the cheap linoleum, her heart was still pounding too hard to be called fear and too deep to be called anything else. Her apartment was small enough that the kitchen and living room bled into one another. One narrow window looked out over an alley where the neon sign from a 24-hour liquor store blinked red against the brick. There were pill bottles lined in military order on the counter for Mia, a grocery list held down by a chipped salt shaker, an unpaid bill folded under the toaster. Real life, unromantic, sharp-edged, the kind of life where women did not become the fake girlfriends of men like Adrian Moretti, unless the universe had finally decided to amuse itself. Olivia set her purse down and braced both hands on the counter. $50,000. That money would cover Mia's next treatment cycle and the specialist consult they had been postponing for 3 months. It would buy time, breath, quiet. She could stop screening calls from collection agencies. She could stop pretending not to see Mia's face every time another prescription got delayed. None of that changed the fact that she had just agreed to spend a week pretending to love the one man she had already failed not to love. She slept badly, not deeply enough to rest, not lightly enough to dream her way out of it. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian standing by that wall of glass, one hand in his pocket, city light cutting his face into shadow and gold. "Because you're the only woman I trust." The compliment should have steadied her. Instead, it left a bruise. Trust was not desire. Reliability was not romance. He had chosen her because she was safe, because she would do her job, because even if her heart cracked open in the process, she would still show up on time with his calendar in order and his coffee exactly the way he liked it. Saturday dragged, Mia called just after noon from her apartment across town, her voice brighter than Olivia knew it really was. "You sound weird," Mia said. Olivia tucked the phone between her shoulder and ear while folding laundry she had no intention of putting away. "I'm tired." Tired has a sound. This is not tired. This is either murder or a man. Olivia laughed despite herself. That is an alarming range. So which is it? Her hand stilled over one of Mia's sweaters she still needed to return. For one reckless second, she imagined telling her. Adrian Moretti. Fake relationship. Family estate. 50 grand. Instead, she said work is complicated. Your job is always complicated. This time, Olivia did not answer right away. Mia, who knew her too well and missed nothing when she had the energy to care, went quiet on the other end. Live. Yeah. Don't do anything that costs more than it pays. Olivia closed her eyes. Too late, she thought. At 6:30 the next evening, Adrian's driver pulled up outside her building. Olivia had changed 3 times already. Every option felt wrong in a different way. Too soft, too stiff, too eager, too plain. She finally settled on a dark blue dress that skimmed her knees and a cream cardigan she could clutch around herself like armor. Her hair was down. Her makeup was minimal. She told herself she was dressing for a business exercise. The lie did not survive the elevator ride to Adrian's penthouse. The doors opened into silence light, and the low hum of a city so far below it looked unreal. The penthouse was vast without feeling cold. Dark wood, Italian leather. Floor-to-ceiling windows turning Chicago into an ocean of amber and white. The air smelled faintly of cedar-expensive whiskey and something darker that always clung to Adrian himself. He stepped out from the kitchen holding 2 wine glasses, and Olivia's heartbeat stumbled hard enough to make her dizzy. He was not in one of his severe charcoal suits tonight. He wore dark jeans and a gray Henley with the sleeves pushed up to his forearms. Bare feet. Damp hair. No tie. No armor, at least not the kind the world usually saw. For one dangerous instant, he looked less like the king of anything and more like a man. "You found it," he said. Your driver was persuasive. A quiet flicker passed through his eyes. Amusement, maybe. He handed her a glass and their fingers brushed. Heat jumped beneath her skin so quickly and cleanly it almost made her drop the stem. "Sit." He nodded toward the long sofa facing the skyline. Olivia crossed to it on careful legs and sat at one end, but Adrian took the space beside her instead of the chair opposite. Close enough that she could smell the wine on his breath when he lifted his glass. Close enough that the weight of his attention felt physical. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city glowed beyond the glass. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and faded. Adrian set his drink down first. "Let's start with the story." Olivia forced air into her lungs. "Right, we met at work. That part should be easy." He gave her a look. "My mother can smell weak lies. Can yours and the truth survive the same room?" A corner of his mouth moved, sometimes. The brief smile did something terrible to her. She looked away first. "How long have we been together?" He leaned back, one arm stretched along the top of the sofa behind her. Not touching. Not quite. Long enough to be serious. Not so long that my sisters start asking why they haven't met you before. 6 months, she said. Long enough for routines. Short enough for secrecy. His gaze lingered on her face. "You're good at this. I'm good at keeping your life from falling apart." Something changed in his expression then. A subtle stillness. As if the room had just reminded him of something he should already know. He looked down into his wine for a moment, then back at her. "How did it happen?" Olivia blinked. "What? How did I fall for you?" The question hit harder than it should have. She forced out a laugh that sounded thin in her own ears. "You're asking me to write your love story for you. I'm asking you what my mother will believe." "No." He turned toward her fully, now the lazy posture gone. "I'm asking what makes sense." She should have kept it easy. Something convenient, almost charming. Shared late nights, office proximity, familiarity turning into affection. Safe, polished things. Instead, she heard herself say, "Maybe one night you stopped looking through me." The words hung between them. Adrian went very still. Olivia stared into her glass. Maybe everyone else had gone home. Maybe we were both tired and not pretending as hard. Maybe you asked me something real for once. Not where the contracts were or what time the meeting moved to. Maybe you asked who I was when I wasn't keeping your world in order. Silence. She finally looked up and found him watching her with an intensity that made her pulse flutter in her throat. And then he asked quietly. Her fingers tightened around the glass. Then maybe the air changed. Maybe you looked at me like I wasn't invisible anymore. His voice dropped. And what would I do then? Olivia should have looked away. She did not. "You touch my face," she said barely above a whisper. Gently. Like you were trying to figure out why it took you so long. The quiet that followed felt alive. Adrian reached over without breaking eye contact and took the glass from her hand. He set it on the table beside his own. "Come here," he said. Every instinct told her not to move. Every other instinct was stronger. She shifted closer. Only an inch at first. Adrian's hand came up and settled against her cheek, exactly the way she had described, warm and careful, his thumb brushing once over her skin. Her breath caught so visibly that his eyes flickered. "If we're going to do this," he said, voice low, "you can't jump every time I touch you." "I'm not jumping. You're trembling." I noticed. His other hand found her waist and guided her closer until her knees angled toward him. The city burned outside the glass. The room felt smaller with every second. "Look at me," he murmured. She did. His eyes were green in daylight, but at night they deepened into something darker, moss and smoke and old secrets. "When we're with my family," he said, "I'll touch you like this." His hand slid from her cheek to the side of her neck, then down to rest at the small of her back. "And this." His thumb traced her jaw. "I'll hold your hand." He took her left hand and laced their fingers together. The fit was so natural it felt obscene. "I'll kiss your forehead, maybe your temple, maybe your hair." He did not wait for permission to demonstrate. He leaned in and pressed his mouth to her forehead, the touch feather light and devastating. Olivia inhaled sharply and heard him exhale through his nose as if the sound cost him. "Relax," he said against her skin. "I'm not going to hurt you." The worst part was that she believed him. His lips brushed her temple next, then paused there for the smallest suspended moment, long enough for heat to surge through her like a struck match. That she whispered is easier to say from your side of it. He pulled back just enough to look at her. Something hot and unreadable flashed through his face. "Is it?" he said. Before she could answer, his phone lit on the table. He glanced at the screen and his whole expression shuddered. Whatever had been in the room with them disappeared behind steel. "I need to take this." Of course he did. Of course, the man she had just nearly melted against was also Adrian Moretti, whose life existed in compartments no one else entered. Olivia stood too quickly, almost grateful for the interruption. "I should go." He rose with her. "Olivia." But she was already reaching for her purse. "We covered enough for one night." The frustration that crossed his face was real and brief. "My driver can take you." "That won't be necessary. Everything with me is necessary." The words came out sharper than he intended. He seemed to realize it a second later and scrubbed a hand through his hair. When he spoke again, his voice was lower. "Tomorrow morning, 10:30, my office. We'll review the rest." Olivia nodded, unable to trust her voice. At the door, she turned back once because not to would have felt stranger. Adrian stood near the windows with one hand braced against the glass phone in the other, watching her leave like something had slipped out of his grasp that he had no business wanting in the first place. By Monday morning, Chicago had done what Chicago always did. It had moved on, sharpened itself, and put on its expensive face before most people had finished their coffee. Olivia reached the office just before 8, pale blue blouse tucked into a gray skirt, her hair pinned up every inch of her arranged to suggest calm. Her desk sat in the outer office, just beyond Adrian's glass doors, close enough to know the rhythm of his day, far enough to pretend she wasn't always aware of him. She had barely set her bag down when his office door opened. Inside, he said, no greeting, no softness. The weekend had been folded and locked away somewhere only he could access. Olivia followed him in. The lock clicked behind her and her pulse jumped in spite of herself. Adrian stood behind his desk for all of 3 seconds before grabbing a tablet and turning the screen toward her. There, splashed across a gossip page in a glossy color, was Adrian exiting Cipriani with a stunning redhead hanging on his arm. Chloe Mercer. Olivia knew the name. Old money. Real estate dynasty. Society page favorite. The caption beneath the photo was cruelly efficient. Adrian Moretti spotted with mystery date amid whispers of new alliance. Olivia stared at the image a fraction too long before lifting her eyes. You said this dinner was business. It was. His jaw tightened. My mother won't care. She looked back at the photo and felt the sting of something ugly and immediate. Jealousy, ridiculous and humiliating. She had no claim on him. Not real, not even fake yet. And still, the sight of another woman's hand on his chest made something in her turn cold. What do you need me to do? He came around the desk. Go home. Change. I'm taking you to lunch. Olivia blinked, now, at noon. Somewhere visible. For who? For everyone. He stopped close enough that she had to tilt her head to hold his gaze. By tonight, every person who saw that photo needs to see one of us. My mother included. And we fix that by staging a date. Not staging. His eyes held hers, selling. A flush climbed her neck. I'm not dressed for this. He had already picked up his phone. You will be. He made one brisk call in Italian, then looked at her again. A stylist will meet you at your apartment in 40 minutes. Pick something that makes you feel dangerous. Her lips parted. Dangerous. His gaze traveled over her in one slow, considering line that made heat rise beneath her skin. You have no idea. At 11:55, Olivia walked back into Moretti Consolidated in a dress she never would have chosen for herself and could no longer imagine leaving behind. The fabric was emerald green and cut to flatter without shouting. The hem skimmed above her knees. Nude heels lengthened her legs. Her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and Isabella, the silent magician Adrian had dispatched to her apartment, had somehow turned Olivia's tired face into something luminous without erasing her from it. Heads turned when she entered the office. Conversation softened, then resumed a beat too late. Olivia kept walking. Adrian's door opened at exactly noon. He stepped out, looked at her, and stopped. Nothing moved for one charged second. Not him, not her, not the interns pretending not to stare. His eyes darkened as they traveled over her, and the reaction was so immediate, so unguarded, that Olivia's pulse kicked hard behind her ribs. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides. One hand rose to touch a strand of hair near her shoulder, letting it slide through his fingers. Olivia. The way he said her name sounded almost rough. Is it too much, she asked, because suddenly she needed to know. His gaze lifted back to hers. Not nearly enough. Then he offered his arm like she belonged there. She took it. The restaurant in the West Loop was exactly what he wanted. Stylish, crowded, and crawling with the kind of people who could turn lunch into a headline before dessert arrived. The hostess recognized Adrian instantly and led them to a corner booth with a clear line of sight from 3 different angles. Adrian slid in beside Olivia, not across from her. His thigh touched hers the moment he settled. His hand came to rest at the back of the booth behind her shoulders, loose enough to seem effortless, close enough to make it impossible for her to forget he was there. Smile, he murmured near her ear as menus appeared. You're supposed to like me. She turned her face toward his before she could stop herself. They were too close. One breath from careless. That part won't need rehearsal, she said. Something flickered in his eyes, then quick and hot gone before she could name it. He ordered for both of them, after checking what she wanted first, a tiny thing that should not have mattered and did. As the waiter walked away, Adrian reached for her hand beneath the table and threaded his fingers through hers. Talk to me. About what? Anything. Tell me something my mother would ask. Olivia took a breath. She'll ask when you knew. He looked at her without blinking. When did I know? She could not afford to answer honestly. So she said, maybe the first time I challenged you. A quiet huff of amusement left him. You do that often, only when necessary. His thumb swept across her knuckles. And when did you know? Her throat tightened. That's not fair. No, he said softly, it isn't. A photographer's flash lit briefly across the room reflected in the window. Adrian did not even glance over. Instead, he shifted closer, his shoulder brushing hers, and asked in a voice only she could hear, "What do you want, Olivia?" The question caught her cleanly off guard. She looked at him. What? What do you want when you stop wanting for other people? No one had ever phrased it that way. As if the life inside her existed apart from duty. As if she were not just a series of solved problems in sensible shoes. She stared down at their joined hands. I want a year where nothing hurts. His expression changed not visibly to anyone else, but enough that she felt it. I want my sister healthy, she continued. I want to open a bill without bracing for impact. I want to go somewhere beautiful and not think about whether I can afford the flight back. I want to be tired because I lived, not because I survived. For a moment he said nothing. Then his fingers tightened around hers. And Mia, Olivia nodded. She has lupus. Good weeks, bad weeks. The bad ones cost more. He watched her like a man looking at a locked door and considering whether he had earned the right to open it. That's why you said yes, partly. And the other part, she should have lied. Instead, she said, I trust you. The words seemed to hit him harder than they should have. Adrian leaned back slightly, studying her face as if she had just offered him something expensive and breakable. You shouldn't, he said at last. Olivia lifted one shoulder. Maybe not. But you do, yes. The food arrived before either of them could speak again. Adrian fed her a bite of his pasta when a camera flashed from the opposite side of the room, and the intimacy of the gesture knocked the breath from her. She managed to laugh when he murmured something dry about paparazzi having no respect for decent cuisine. He brushed a crumb from the corner of her mouth with his thumb. She forgot for one dangerous second that they had an audience. By the time they left the restaurant, his hand was spread warmly at the center of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Outside, people pretended not to notice them and failed badly. In the car, Adrian checked his phone and turned the screen toward her. There they were already. Adrian Moretti, seen looking very taken with executive assistant at midday lunch. Olivia stared at the photo. In it, she was looking up at him with parted lips and a softness so open it made her stomach drop. There was no pretending in her face, no calculation, no polish. Just hunger wrapped in trust, and the shock of recognizing herself in that expression nearly took the air from her lungs. She loved him, not in theory, not in danger, not on the verge of something. Already, completely, stupidly, she turned toward the window before he could read it in her eyes. You all right? Fine. The lie came out too fast. Adrian's hand touched her bare knee just once. You can tell me if this is too much. She almost laughed at the impossibility of the question. Too much had happened 2 years ago, the first time he thanked her for staying late and meant it. Too much had happened on his couch with his hand on her face and his mouth at her temple. Too much had happened the moment she realized that a week in his life would never be enough. It's not too much, she said quietly. It was not enough. That was the problem. Back at the office, she changed in the restroom into the spare blouse and flats she kept in her desk drawer. When she emerged, she caught Adrian watching her through the glass wall of his office, his phone in his hand, his face unreadable. A second later, her own phone buzzed. Dinner, my place, 8 o'clock, we need more practice. Olivia looked up. Adrian was still watching her, one hand tucked into his pocket, as composed as ever. But something had shifted. She could feel it like a live current just beneath the skin of the day. She slipped the phone into her desk drawer and sat down, trying to focus on the stack of contracts waiting for approval. The calendar revisions, the donor dinner she still needed to move from Thursday to Friday morning. Outside his office, phones rang. Assistants crossed the hall with files. Men in tailored suits spoke in low voices about numbers that could buy buildings. Chicago kept turning. Inside her chest, nothing felt orderly anymore. That night, when Adrian's message lit up her screen again, Olivia already knew she would go. She changed twice before his driver arrived, then stood in front of her mirror, hating the fact that she cared. The green dress from lunch was at the cleaner, and maybe that was for the best. She chose dark jeans, a soft ivory sweater that slipped off one shoulder if she moved wrong, and gold hoops Mia had given her 2 birthdays ago because they made her look in Mia's words like a woman with better luck than she actually had. Chicago was colder after dark. The streets looked scrubbed clean by the afternoon wind, all black asphalt and silver reflections under the lamps. By the time the private elevator opened into Adrian's penthouse, Olivia had talked herself into calm 3 separate times. It lasted until she saw him. He was waiting near the windows with 2 glasses of red wine, already poured, tie loosened, top button open, suit jacket gone. The city burned behind him. He looked less put together than usual, which on Adrian Moretti only made him more dangerous. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice was quieter tonight, not softer. Tired, maybe. "You said we needed practice." "We do." He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing again. That tiny contact had become its own language between them. A spark, a dare, a punishment. They sat on the long sofa, not close enough to touch this time, but close enough that she could feel the heat of him if she let herself notice too hard. Adrian took a drink and looked out at the skyline before saying, "My sister called this afternoon." Olivia waited. "She thinks something is off, because you've never brought anyone around." His mouth curved without humor. "Because I've never brought anyone around, and because she knows I don't do anything halfway." According to Sophia, a man does not keep a woman's secret for 6 months unless he's either in love or lying. Olivia curled her fingers tighter around the stem of her glass. "That's inconvenient." "For me, yes." She turned toward him. "So, what do we do?" He looked at her then fully, and the focus in his eyes made it feel as if the room had narrowed to the space between them. "We stop memorizing and start knowing." Meaning my family will ask questions that don't sound like questions. Things couples answer without thinking. How you take your coffee. What makes you angry. Which side of the bed you sleep on. Whether I steal the blankets. Whether you snore. Olivia smiled despite herself. "Do you? Do I what? Steal the blankets. I have never had a verified complaint." She laughed, and something in his face eased for the first time that night. "All right," she said, "I sleep on the right side." That was immediate. I knew mine. You take your coffee black. You hate breakfast meetings because you're not fully human before 9. You refuse umbrellas even when it's raining hard enough to drown tourists. And you loosen your cufflinks when you're angry, which you were at 3:40 this afternoon when that call from Boston came in. Adrian stared at her. "You notice a lot," he said. "I'm your assistant." "No." He set down his glass. "That explains the meetings and the coffee. It doesn't explain the rest." Olivia looked at the city because looking at him felt risky. "Maybe I'm observant. Maybe." He shifted toward her, one arm draped across the back of the sofa behind her shoulders. Not touching. Waiting. My turn. Which side of the bed and coffee are easy? Tell me something I wouldn't already know from your file. She went still at that word, file, as if there were anything in a folder that could explain the last 10 years of her life. "My favorite movie is Roman Holiday," she said lightly. "I cry every single time and I don't appreciate being judged for it." "I am not judging you. You are absolutely judging me. I'm rethinking your instincts." She snorted softly. He smiled for real this time, brief and devastating. Then his expression changed. "That's still easy. Tell me something real." The warmth in the room thinned. Olivia drew a slow breath. "My parents died when I was 20. Adrian did not move. Did not soften in that performative way some people did when they heard bad news. He simply listened. Mia was 17, Olivia continued. I was supposed to go back to school that fall. I didn't. One semester became another, then it stopped being a pause and became a life. She looked down at her hands. I worked wherever I could. Coffee shops, reception desks, temp work, anything that paid. Mia got diagnosed 2 years later. By then, I wasn't postponing my future anymore. I had one. Silence stretched between them, but it wasn't empty. Adrian asked, "Do you miss them every day?" The question was so direct it landed somewhere unguarded. "Yes," she said. Some days like background noise, some days like a cracked rib. He held her gaze. What were they like? No one ever asked that. They asked how long it had been where it happened, whether she had siblings, all the neat, practical boxes grief was expected to fit inside. No one asked about the people. Olivia swallowed. "My dad taught high school history. He made everything sound like it was happening right in front of you. My mom was a nurse who never sat down." She laughed with her whole body. She used to dance in the kitchen when dinner was burning. Adrian's eyes had gone darker, listening eyes. Dangerous eyes. "You have your mother's laugh," he said quietly. The words caught her off guard. "You've never met my mother." "No, but I know enough to be certain." For one reckless moment, Olivia forgot to protect herself. "Tell me something real about you," she said. He leaned back, gaze shifting to the river of light below. "My favorite meal is my mother's Sunday gravy. I hate sleeping alone more than I'm willing to admit. I still hear my father's voice when I walk into a room full of men who think fear makes them strong." Her breath slowed. Adrian rarely offered pieces of himself without charging admission. "When did he die?" she asked softly. "I was 15. And after that," he gave a quiet exhale through his nose, "after that I became useful." Useful. Not strong, not better, useful. It was the saddest thing he could have called himself. Olivia turned more fully toward him. "To your mother, to the family, to people who depended on me." That was the language I understood. Something in his jaw tightened, then eased. "You know the rest by reputation." "Reputation isn't the same thing as truth." His gaze returned to hers. "No. Number." For a second, she thought he might say something sharp or dismissive or careful. Instead, he looked at her with a kind of quiet astonishment that made her chest ache. "You're the only person in my life who says things like that to me," he murmured. "Someone should. Someone should be more afraid. Maybe I'm not smart enough." His eyes dropped to her mouth, then lifted again. "No," he said. "You're exactly smart enough." Neither of them moved. The room held its breath with them, to break it. Olivia took a sip of wine she no longer wanted and asked, "What's your favorite movie?" That did it. The corner of his mouth tipped. "You're trying to rescue us from sincerity. I'm trying to rescue myself from your stare. Fair. So." He sighed as if the answer offended him. "The Godfather." Olivia stared. "That is painfully predictable. It's a classic. It's a cliché. My mother loves old Hepburn films," he said. "If it helps, I can quote half of Roman Holiday through cultural exposure." Now she was smiling again. "That helps a little." "It shouldn't." "It does." They talked for almost an hour, after that first in fragments, then in stories. She learned he hated cilantro with irrational passion, and had once broken his wrist falling off a dock at 12 because he refused to admit a jump was a bad idea. He learned she collected old paperbacks from thrift stores and made lasagna when she was too tired to feel sorry for herself because layering things neatly was the closest she got to peace. He told her Sophia had always been the sister who saw through him fastest, while Nina preferred to set fires and watch other people explain them. She told him Mia could identify every constellation from the roof of their childhood apartment, because there had been years when stars were the only luxury either of them could afford. At some point, their glasses were empty. At some point, the city disappeared, and the room became only lamplight and voice, and the quiet shock of not wanting the night to end. Adrian stood first. "My mother will make us dance," he said. Olivia blinked. "Excuse me." "At the party. There will be music and old traditions and too many people pretending not to watch." He held out his hand. "Come here." She looked at his hand, then at him. I'm not very good. I'll lead. That sounds like something a control freak says before stepping on my foot. A low laugh left him. I have many flaws, Olivia. Clumsy isn't one of them. The music came from hidden speakers, something slow and old and velvet soft. He crossed to her when she hesitated and took the wine glass from her hand before setting it aside. Then his fingers closed around hers and pulled her gently to her feet. He brought her close. One hand at her lower back, one hand lifting hers between them. Her pulse kicked so hard she thought he had to feel it. Relax, he said. That advice is growing less useful every time you say it. His eyes warmed. Step with me. She did. At first, she counted without meaning to. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. But Adrian moved like he did everything else with clean confidence and careful control. Soon, the counting fell away. Her body adjusted to his. The steady pressure of his palm at her back became a guide, then a comfort, then a problem of a very different kind. He smelled like starched cedar and the faintest trace of smoke. You're thinking too hard, he murmured. I always think too hard. I know. You say that like you've made peace with it. He looked down at her, one brow lifting. Have I ever given you the impression I want you simpler? The answer lodged somewhere just beneath her heart. They turned slowly in the lamplight, the windows catching their reflection. From a distance, they would have looked exactly right. A dark-haired man, built like command and consequence. A woman tucked against him as if she belonged in the space his body made around her. Adrian's hand shifted slightly higher on her back. Not enough to scandalize. Enough to make her notice. Can I ask you something personal? He said. You already did. Something else. Olivia looked at his collar instead of his eyes. All right. Have you ever been in love? The question changed the air. She kept moving because stillness felt impossible. Once. How long ago? A few years. And she took a breath. He wanted someone easier. Someone without a sick sister and overdue bills and 1,000 reasons to stay practical. He said I carried too much. Adrian's steps never faltered, but his grip on her hand tightened. He said that to you. He was not a poet. He was an idiot. The words were flat and immediate. Olivia gave a sad little laugh. That's one interpretation. It's the only one I'm interested in. Adrian's hand left her back and came up to her face, fingertips curving along her jaw while they continued the smallest possible movement in place. Taking care of people isn't a flaw. I know that now. No, his gaze pinned hers. You know it because you survived it. That's not the same as hearing someone say you deserved better. Her throat tightened. You deserved better, he said, each word quiet and exact. The room had gone impossibly still around them. The music was still playing, but it felt very far away. Adrian's eyes dropped to her mouth. This time, neither of them pretended not to notice. Her hand on his shoulder tightened. His thumb moved once along her jaw. The space between them vanished to a breath, then half of one. She could see the dark fan of his lashes, the rough line of stubble shadowing his jaw, the way his chest rose once and held. A phone rang. The sound was violent in the silence. Adrian closed his eyes for 1 second, then opened them again with something dark and frustrated flickering beneath the surface. He stepped back just enough to reach into his pocket. I'm sorry. Olivia looked away, first wrapping her arms around herself while he checked the screen. It's Sophia. He answered immediately. The shift in him was instant, all sharpened edges and alert focus. Soft, slow down. Olivia watched his face change as he listened. What happened? A pause. Then something dangerous settled into his expression. He touched you. His voice went so cold, the room seemed to lose 10 degrees. Olivia's stomach twisted. Adrian turned toward the windows, one hand braced against the glass. Listen to me. Take the kids and walk out the front door. Don't pack. Don't argue with him. I'm sending a car now. He listened again, jaw tight enough to cut. No, I don't care what he says. I'll handle him. You hear me? I'll handle him. A beat. Yes, I know. Just get outside. He hung up and was already reaching for his keys before Olivia could ask. Sophia's husband came home drunk, he said. Started throwing things. Oh my God. The kids are there. He grabbed his jacket from the back of a chair. Come with me. Olivia blinked. Adrian, this is your family. He looked at her like the objection itself offended him. Exactly. They were in the elevator less than a minute later. Adrian drove himself, which told her more about his state of mind than any snapped command could have. The black sedan tore through the city with dangerous precision, his hands steady on the wheel, his face carved from something harder than anger. He's done this before, Olivia said quietly. Adrian's jaw flexed too many times, and Sophia stays. She keeps thinking the version she loved is still in there somewhere. Olivia stared out at the passing lights. That's a brutal thing to kill in a person. His hand left the wheel long enough to find hers on the center console. He laced their fingers together and held on as if he needed the contact as much as she did. The house sat on a narrow residential street where the porches were close and the paint on the trim had started to peel. Sophia stood under the weak yellow porch light in a coat thrown over pajamas, two children pressed against her sides. Her face was pale and set. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit. The boy looked older than he should have. Adrian was out of the car before the engine fully died. He crossed the yard in 3 strides and folded Sophia into his arms. I've got you, he said. The words were rougher than she had ever heard from him. Sophia's control broke on a single hard breath. Not sobbing, not dramatic. Just one human crack of sound that made Olivia's chest ache. She went to the children, crouching so she met them eye level. Hey, she said gently. I'm Olivia. The little girl stared at her. Daddy was yelling. I know. Olivia held out her hand. Can I help with Bunny? After a second, the child nodded and handed over the stuffed rabbit as if it were a sacred trust. The boy said, Are you Uncle Adrian's girlfriend? Children and honesty. No mercy in either. Olivia glanced up instinctively. Adrian was loading a bag Sophia must have thrown together at the last second into the trunk. His face was still hard enough to frighten grown men. She looked back at the child. I'm with him tonight. The boy seemed to consider that, then nodded once, as if she had passed some test she did not know she was taking. In the car back to the penthouse, Sophia sat in front with her coat wrapped tightly around herself. The children dozed in the back with their heads leaning into Olivia, one on each side. Adrian drove in silence until the city lights returned. At a red light, Sophia looked over at Olivia and said softly, So you're Olivia. There was something in her voice. Curiosity, yes. Something else, too. Recognition. Olivia smiled gently. I am. My brother says your name like a problem he doesn't mind having. Adrian's grip tightened on the wheel. Sophia. What? She leaned back against the seat. It's true. Olivia did not trust herself to answer. Back at the penthouse, the night broke into tasks. Adrian got Sophia settled in the guest suite. Olivia found blankets, a clean set of pajamas for the children from some drawer their uncle apparently kept stocked for emergencies, and then moved into the kitchen because children calmed down faster with something warm in their hands. She made cocoa the way Mia liked it, extra milk, less sugar. The little girl perched on a stool and watched her with solemn eyes while the boy sat at the island, pretending not to be scared. Do you know how to make the tiny marshmallows float? He asked. Olivia smiled. That depends. Are you willing to trust very advanced science? It earned the first ghost of a grin. By the time Adrian returned to the kitchen, both children were wrapped in blankets holding mugs with both hands. He stopped in the doorway and watched the scene as if he had not expected to find something so gentle in his own home. Sophia came in a moment later, her face washed, hair pulled back, still shaken but steadier. Thank you, she told Olivia. Of course. Sophia's eyes moved between her and Adrian with a look that felt almost knowing, but she said nothing more. When the children had finally been coaxed into bed and the apartment fell quiet again, the hour had turned late enough that even the city outside seemed exhausted. Olivia picked up her purse from the chair where she had left it. I should go. Adrian, standing across the room with one hand braced on the back of the sofa, looked at her as if the suggestion made no sense. It's after midnight. I know. Stay. The word landed softly, but there was nothing casual in it. Olivia glanced toward the hallway where Sophia and the kids were sleeping. I don't want to be in the way. You're not. He crossed to her then, close enough that she had to lift her chin to meet his eyes. Stay. Something in his face undid her. The anger had burned out of him, leaving only fatigue and that dangerous, unguarded gratitude he rarely let anyone see. Okay, she whispered. Relief moved through his features so quickly she almost thought she imagined it. He showed her to a guest room larger than her apartment bedroom and set a folded t-shirt and soft drawstring pants on the bed. Housekeeper keeps extras. Your housekeeper plans for everything. I do. The answer came dry, automatic. It made her smile. At the door, she caught his hand before he could leave. Adrian. He looked down at her fingers around his wrist, then back at her face. Are you okay? For a long second, he said nothing. Then very quietly, I am when you're here. Before she could breathe, around that, he turned her hand over and pressed his lips to her knuckles. Not hurried, not strategic. A touch so careful it felt intimate beyond reason. Good night, Olivia. She barely found her voice. Good night. The room was dark by the time she lay down, but sleep did not come easily. Her body still held the memory of his hand at her back. His mouth almost on hers, the rough promise in his voice when he told his sister he would handle it. Somewhere down the hall a child laughed once in sleep and went quiet again. Somewhere deeper in the apartment a door opened and closed softly. Adrian, moving through his own home like a man who would stand guard until morning if he had to. When Olivia finally drifted off, it was with the strange, unsteady feeling that she had stepped into the real center of his life and found not darkness, but devotion. A knock at the door woke her. Olivia, his voice muffled by wood. She sat up too fast, disoriented by pale morning light and expensive sheets. Come in. Adrian stepped inside carrying a mug of coffee in one hand and a small shopping bag in the other. He had showered. His hair was still damp. He wore jeans and a navy t-shirt that made him look indecently young from a distance and more dangerous up close. I figured you might not want to wear last night's clothes to work. He set the bag on the bed, then the coffee on the nightstand. Olivia looked inside and found a cream-knit dress undergarments, even a pair of flats in her size. She stared up at him. You had clothes delivered at 7 in the morning. I had clothes delivered at 6:30. Against all logic, she laughed. His gaze rested on her face for a beat too long. How did you sleep? Eventually. Good. The room went quiet around the steam rising from the coffee. Adrian's eyes moved over her without hurry. Bare face, messy hair, sleep still clinging to her. You look beautiful in the morning, he said. Olivia actually blinked. I look awake by force. Same thing on you. A warm flush climbed her throat. She reached for the coffee because her hands needed somewhere to go. How's Sophia? She's still asleep. The kids are up and negotiating breakfast terms like union lawyers. That image made her smile. Adrian watched the smile like he wanted to keep it. I should get ready, she said, because the room was becoming too small again. He nodded, but lingered one heartbeat longer than necessary before stepping back. We'll leave in 40 minutes. By the time Olivia emerged dressed and put together enough to face daylight, the apartment smelled like butter and coffee. She followed the sound of children's voices into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. Adrian stood at the stove making pancakes with the seriousness he usually reserved for hostile negotiations. The little girl sat on the counter swinging her legs while the boy arranged forks on the table with military precision. The child on the counter turned, saw Olivia, and beamed. You stayed. Olivia smiled. Looks like I did. Adrian looked over his shoulder at her and went still for the briefest moment. His eyes took in the cream dress, her hair pinned back loosely, the faint color in her cheeks from rushing. Morning, he said, voice lower than before. Morning. The little girl leaned toward Adrian and stage whispered loudly enough for everyone to hear, She's prettier than the ladies on your phone. Olivia nearly choked. Adrian set down the spatula with complete composure. That is because there are no ladies on my phone worth discussing. The boy rolled his eyes in the ancient way only children can. Uncle Adrian lies when he's nervous. Adrian looked offended. I do not get nervous. You do around her, the boy said, jerking his chin toward Olivia. Olivia bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. Sophia appeared in the doorway just then, hair loose over her shoulders, exhaustion still in her face, but less of the fear. She took in the room the children Adrian at the stove. Olivia trying not to laugh, and something softened in her expression. Well, she said this is domestic. Adrian shot her a warning look. Sophia ignored it and crossed to the coffee. Breakfast was loud in the easy way families sometimes become after a bad night, as if noise itself can push back what happened in the dark. The children argued about syrup. Sophia made dry comments under her breath. Adrian corrected no one and noticed everything. More than once, Olivia caught him watching her over the rim of his coffee mug, something thoughtful and almost vulnerable moving behind his eyes. When it was time to leave for work, he drove her himself. Downtown gathered around them as the car merged into traffic steel and glass flashing under a clean blue sky. For a few blocks, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian reached across the center console and took her hand. He did not look at her when he asked, "Tell me the truth." Olivia turned toward him. "Does any of this still feel fake to you?" Her heart stopped, then started again too hard. Before she could answer, his phone rang through the speakers loud and relentless in the quiet car. Adrian swore under his breath and tapped the control on the steering wheel. Nina. His younger sister's voice filled the cabin bright and sharp, even through the speakers. "I heard about Sophia. Why am I always the last person told anything in this family?" "Because you weaponize information for sport," Adrian said. "That is slander." "Also true. Is she all right?" "She's safe. The kids are with her." A pause. Then Nina's tone shifted lighter in a way that made Olivia suspicious. "And is Olivia with you right now?" Adrian glanced once at Olivia and then back at the road. "Yes," good Nina said. "Tell her I like her already." Olivia leaned closer to the console. "That feels premature." Nina laughed. "You survived breakfast with my brother's face in broad daylight. You've earned something." Adrian pinched the bridge of his nose at a red light. "Goodbye, Nina. Wait. Mom wants everyone in Lake Geneva by noon tomorrow, not 2. She says if her son is finally bringing home a woman worth meeting, she refuses to lose 3 hours of it to traffic." Adrian's mouth tightened, noted. The call ended. For a moment, only the hum of the engine filled the car. Olivia looked down at their joined hands, still resting on the console between them. Neither of them had let go. "You didn't answer me," Adrian said quietly. She could have pretended not to know what he meant. Instead, she watched the city slide by in flashes of glass and shadow and told him the smallest honest thing she could manage. "It feels less fake every time I'm with your family." His thumb moved once over her knuckles. He said nothing after that, but his grip on her hand did not loosen until he pulled up outside the tower. The office was worse the next day because normal life insisted on continuing. Calls needed routing. Meetings needed moving. Contracts still wanted signatures. Men who had no idea a woman's heart could be split open by a single sentence kept asking Olivia whether Mr. Moretti was available for lunch next Thursday. Adrian stayed inside his office most of the morning, but the glass walls were little help. She could feel him in every shift of the day, in the movement of his silhouette, in the way his head lifted every time her phone rang, in the heat of his attention whenever she carried files inside and set them on his desk. At 11, a florist arrived with a box so large the reception staff craned their necks to see the card. Inside were ivory roses and pale pink ranunculus arranged with the kind of quiet extravagance that did not need to announce a price to prove one had been paid. Olivia stared at the flowers as if they might rearrange themselves into a safer shape. Jennifer, from legal, passed by and gave a low whistle. "Well, somebody's in trouble." Olivia slid the card from the envelope before anyone else could. The handwriting was unmistakably Adrian's. Clean. Yanted? Controlled. Thank you for last night. For being there when my family needed you. For being exactly who you are. Heat climbed her throat. She turned the card over as if something on the back might rescue her from the simple intimacy of the words. There was nothing. At 12:27 her phone buzzed. Dinner tonight. 7, my place. A second message followed before she could answer. No interruptions this time. Olivia stared at the screen until the letters blurred. By 6:30, she was standing in her apartment in a black dress that fit too well and made her feel like she was volunteering for her own destruction. It skimmed her body without clinging and dipped just enough at the neckline to suggest intention. She left her hair down. She told herself she was tired of looking like a woman waiting to be chosen. When Adrian opened the penthouse door, he looked at her once and went completely still. Every careful phrase she had prepared dissolved. He wore dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. One top button open. No jacket, no tie. The kind of clothes that should have made him seem less formidable. Instead, they made him look dangerously human. For a suspended second, neither of them spoke. Then Adrian stepped aside. Come in. The apartment smelled like garlic wine and fresh basil. Music drifted softly from hidden speakers, something low and old. Candles burned on the dining table near the windows. No assistants, no staff, no folders, no performance. You cooked, Olivia said, because it was the first thing her mind could hold. He shut the door behind her. Do I seem incapable? No, just expensive. A small smile touched his mouth. That is one of the ruder things anyone has ever said to me in my own home. She almost laughed from nerves. Almost. Smells good. His gaze dropped briefly to her mouth and then lifted again. You look good. There should have been flirtation in the words, something smooth. Instead, he said it like a man giving in to a fact. Thank you, she said softly. He took her coat and set it aside. His fingers brushed the bare skin of her arm as he did, and the tiny contact flashed through her like heat striking glass. Dinner should have helped. It should have restored boundaries, put forks and plates and conversation between whatever had started changing in that penthouse and whatever dangerous thing it wanted to become. Instead, the candlelight only made everything worse. He had made pasta with slow-cooked sauce and set a bottle of Barolo on the table like he had planned the evening too carefully to admit it. They ate, facing the city. Chicago stretched beneath them in silver and amber lines. Every so often, Adrian looked at her in a way that made her lose track of what she had just said. He asked real questions tonight. Not the kinds of things families ask to test a story, but the things men ask when they want to understand what made a woman into herself. What was your favorite memory growing up? Olivia twirled pasta around her fork and thought for a moment. Summer thunderstorms. My mother would turn off every light in the apartment and we'd sit by the open windows counting until the thunder hit. My father said it taught respect for timing. Adrian listened, chin resting lightly against his hand. You miss that? Yes. Not just them, that version of home. The accuracy of it settled in her chest. Yes. He nodded, as if he had merely confirmed something he already suspected. When the plates were half empty and the wine had softened the sharpest edges of the day, Olivia set down her glass and asked the question she had been circling for 2 nights. Tell me about Madeline. Something in Adrian's face stilled. Not closed, not exactly. You remembered her name. You don't say things you don't mean. I assumed if you gave me her name, it mattered. He sat back, slightly, one hand curled around the stem of his glass. The city reflected in the window behind him, making it look as if distant fires burned at his shoulders. She was beautiful in a way people trusted too easily, he said. Smart, funny, better at lying than I was at being careful. How did you meet? At a fundraiser. She laughed at the right jokes and never once looked afraid of me. His mouth tightened. That impressed me more than it should have. Olivia waited. For 2 years I thought she loved me, he continued. Then I found out she was passing information to a rival. Schedules, names, locations. Nothing dramatic enough to attract headlines. just enough to make people vulnerable. Olivia felt cold despite the candles. Did she know what could happen if the wrong information reached the wrong hands? Adrian's eyes lifted to hers. She knew exactly. The answer sat between them, heavy and quiet. "I'm sorry," Olivia said. He gave the smallest shake of his head. "Don't be. It taught me what I needed to learn." What was that? That love is easier to survive than trust. She looked at him for a long moment. "I don't think that's true." His gaze sharpened. "No, I think betrayal teaches people to call fear wisdom." He did not speak. Olivia leaned back in her chair, pulse steadying only because she forced it to. "You say it taught you what you needed to learn. Maybe it taught you what keeps you safe." That's not always the same thing. Something moved behind his eyes then. Not anger. Recognition, maybe. The kind that hurts. "You make dangerous distinctions," he said quietly. Someone should. A breath passed between them. Then another. Adrian set down his glass and rose from the table. He came around her side slowly. No sudden motion. No room to pretend she had not noticed what the air was becoming. When he reached her, he held out his hand. "Come here." Her chair scraped softly against the floor as she stood. His hand closed around hers and drew her with him toward the windows. The city below looked unreal at that height. So far away, it seemed possible none of it could touch them. But Adrian did not stop at the glass. He turned her to face him. His hands settled lightly at her waist, not claiming, not cautious either. The contact stole the steadiness from her lungs. "This thing between us," he said. "Tell me I imagined it." Olivia's throat went dry. "Adrian, tell me none of it was real. The restaurant, last night. You with the kids, you in my car this morning. Tell me I read all of it wrong." She looked up at him and saw something she had not let herself name before. Not control, not desire alone. Want, yes, but threaded through with risk. A man who knew exactly how much he was exposing by asking. "I can't," she whispered. His hands tightened once at her waist. Not enough to hurt, enough to tell the truth. The phone on the dining table lit up and began to ring. Neither of them moved. It rang again. Adrian closed his eyes briefly, then let go of her with visible effort and crossed the room to answer it. "Ma." His voice changed on the word warmer without softening. Olivia stayed where she was, every nerve alive, and hated that she could hear enough of the conversation to understand what it meant. "Yes, we're still coming tomorrow." A pause. "Yes, she's here." Another pause, then the faintest change in his mouth, not quite a smile. "Yes, she's special." Olivia looked away before the words could do more damage than they already had. He listened for a moment, then said, "No, I'm not discussing grandchildren with you while I'm holding a phone." The sound that escaped Olivia was half laugh, half disbelief. Adrian glanced over at her, and the look in his eyes at hearing her laugh nearly undid her. When he ended the call, the room had changed again. The same candles burned. The same music played. The same skyline glittered beyond the glass. But something had shifted into place between them that no interruption could pull apart now. Adrian crossed back to her slowly. "My mother would like it formally noted that she has waited long enough." Olivia folded her arms around herself because, if she did not, she might reach for him first. "That sounds like Evelyn Moretti." "It does." Silence moved through the room, not empty now, but full. Then Olivia said the only thing she trusted enough to say. "Don't say something tonight that belongs to tomorrow." He stopped inches away. "What do you think I'm about to say?" She laughed softly, but there was no humor in it. "Something that sounds beautiful in candlelight and impossible in daylight." His face changed, not dramatically, more dangerous than that. A stillness in him that meant whatever came next would not be casual. "Olivia," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded more intimate than a kiss. "I don't do beautiful lies." She lifted her chin. "You hired me to help you tell one." A brief shadow crossed his eyes. "No. I hired you because I wanted a reason to keep you close, and did not trust myself enough to call it what it was." The confession landed so hard she forgot to breathe. Adrian stepped closer until there was no space left that felt safe. I told myself it was practical, he continued. Contained. A week, a family dinner, a solution to a problem. I told myself if I could have you near me, under terms I controlled, maybe it would stop feeling like this. His hand came up slowly and touched her face fingers warm against her jaw. It didn't. Olivia could hear her heartbeat in her ears. You should have said something, she whispered. His mouth curved without humor. I'm very good at many things. This was not one of them. Because I worked for you. Because you mattered enough to lose. The room went quiet around that. Olivia looked at him as if she could find the shape of her own hope reflected somewhere in his face. And now I'm done pretending my self-control is noble. His thumb moved once across her cheekbone. His eyes dropped to her mouth and stayed there. Adrian, she said, but it came out like surrender. This is the part where you stop me if you want to. She did not stop him. He kissed her slowly at first as if he had no interest in stealing anything she was not choosing to give. His mouth was warm and careful, and devastatingly sure. Olivia made a small sound she had never heard herself make, and reached for his shirt with both hands. That changed everything. The kiss deepened with the force of something held back too long. Adrian drew her closer until there was no room left between them. One hand slid into her hair, tilting her head just enough to take the kiss further. The other anchored at the curve of her waist. Olivia felt the hard line of his body and the shuddering restraint in it, and kissed him back with all the hunger she had spent 2 years hiding behind schedules and polite distance. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing harder than the moment should have allowed. Adrian rested his forehead against hers. Tell me that wasn't real. Olivia gave a breathless laugh that almost broke in the middle. That was the most real thing that's happened to me in years. He closed his eyes for 1 second, as if the answer cost him something and relieved him at the same time. Her hands were still curled in his shirt. She could feel his heart beneath the cotton, hard and unsteady. What are we doing? She asked. He lifted his head and looked straight into her. I'm taking you to Lake Geneva tomorrow. That was always the plan. No. His voice lowered. Not like this. The city glittered behind him like witness. I don't want to bring home my fake girlfriend anymore, Olivia. I want to bring home the woman I can't stop thinking about. The one who walked into my life and somehow made every version of me less empty. Tears pricked behind her eyes with no permission from her at all. She hated that. She hated crying where anyone could see it. Adrian's expression changed the instant he noticed. Hey! His thumb brushed beneath one eye before the tears could fall. I'm terrified, she admitted. Of me. Of this. She looked down, then back up because she had already come too far for cowardice. Of the office. Of what happens when a week ends. Of being the only one who forgets how to go back. Something fierce and quiet settled over his face. You won't be the only one. It was such a simple answer. It nearly wrecked her. He kissed her again, softer this time. Not claiming, but promising. When he drew back, his hand stayed in her hair, as if he had no intention of letting distance return too quickly. We'll figure out the office, he said. If you want boundaries, we'll have them. If you want a new role, you'll have one. If you need space, I'll give it to you. But I am not going to stand here and lie to you about what I feel, because it would be tidier. Olivia let out a shaky breath. You really are very bad at tidy where I'm concerned. A real smile touched his mouth, then brief and bright enough to hurt. You noticed. I notice everything. I know. That answer again. Like a confession, like gratitude. He kissed her forehead, then her temple, and this time neither of them had to pretend it was rehearsal. Olivia leaned into him and let herself have the impossible thing for 1 suspended minute. The city below. Candles burning low. His arms around her. Her cheek against his chest. The steady thunder of his heart under her ear. Later, when she finally left, he walked her all the way to the elevator with her coat draped over his arm and his hand at the small of her back. At the doors, he turned her toward him once more. My driver will pick you up at 9:30, he said. That early. My mother moved the deadline. Of course she did. His eyes warmed. Pack for the lake. One formal dress for the party. Everything else I'll handle. She raised a brow. That sounds ominous. It's logistics. It sounds like control wearing a nice suit. He leaned closer just enough that her pulse changed. You say that like you mind. The elevator arrived before she could answer. Adrian kissed her once quick and dangerous in the small rectangle of chrome and reflected light, then stepped back before the doors closed. Olivia rode down with her fingers pressed to her mouth and the impossible new knowledge burning through every careful thought she had ever built. He wanted her, not as a role, not as a temporary arrangement, not as a woman convenient enough to borrow for a week. Her morning came too quickly. Chicago looked almost innocent in early light washed pale gold at the edges. Olivia packed in a daze that kept breaking into moments of sharp clarity. A dark green sundress folded beside a cream blouse. Sandals. Heels. Toiletries. The black dress she had nearly talked herself out of buying last winter because she had nowhere to wear it. She stood over the open suitcase and realized with a quiet kind of shock that she had spent most of her life packing for necessity. Work trips, hospital waits, emergencies. Never for the possibility of joy. At 9:15, her phone lit up with a message. Ready. No greeting, no flourish, just the word. She smiled despite herself and typed back. Terrified, but yes. His response came immediately. Good. I would worry if you weren't. The car ride out of Chicago felt unreal from the first mile. Adrian sat beside her in the back seat instead of across from her as if there had never been another option. He wore a navy jacket over an open collar and dark sunglasses for the first half hour until the city thinned into stretches of highway and open sky. Then he took them off and set them aside, and the intimacy of that small act made Olivia's chest tighten. He reached for her hand almost absently, like a habit they had skipped the awkwardness of acquiring. The skyline shrank behind them. Illinois blurred into green and silver. Then Wisconsin rose around them in quieter roads and long trees. Olivia watched the landscape change and felt her nerves rearrange themselves with every mile. You're quiet, Adrian said. She looked over at him. I'm trying to imagine your mother. He leaned back against the leather seat, their joined hands resting on his thigh. Elegant, dangerous in silk, more observant than either of us would prefer. That is not reassuring. It should be. A faint smile touched his mouth. She's wanted to meet you for months. Olivia turned fully toward him. Because of the fake story. No, he said. The answer came too quickly to be casual. Adrian looked out the window for a beat, then back at her. Because I talked about you long before I asked you to do any of this. Her breath stalled. How long before? Long enough past that she thought he might evade it. Then he gave her the truth. Long enough that my mother stopped pretending not to notice. Warmth swept through her and left fear tangled in its wake. You are telling me this in a moving vehicle where I can't escape. That was strategic. She laughed softly, helplessly, and he watched the sound happen as if it still surprised him every time. The road curved. Trees parted. A sheet of blue appeared through them, sudden and bright. Lake Geneva. The water flashed under the afternoon sun, and beyond it, set back behind iron gates and old stone pillars, the Moretti estate came into view. White limestone. Dark shutters. Wide porches. Gardens cut with formal precision and softened by the lake wind. It looked less like a house than a place built to endure generations of memory and weather and grief. Olivia's heart began to pound. Adrian felt it through her hand somehow. She was sure of it. He turned to her thumb, brushing once over her knuckles. Breathe. She let out a shaky laugh. Very bossy for a man trying to impress his girlfriend. His gaze held hers deep and intent, and no longer remotely fake. Good, he said quietly. Because I'm not trying to impress my girlfriend. The car slowed at the gates and rolled through. He lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed her knuckles once, his eyes never leaving hers. I'm bringing home the woman I want. The words stayed with Olivia even after the car came to a stop beneath the wide stone portico. A man in a navy blazer opened the rear door, but Adrian was already out, first one hand extended toward her before the driver could offer his. She took it. The afternoon air smelled like lake water, cut grass, and early summer heat warming old stone. Somewhere nearby, wind moved through trees with the soft, dry sound of silk dragged across carpet. The house rose behind Adrian in pale limestone, and dark blue shutters elegant without trying, impossible without apology. And at the top of the front steps stood a woman who could only be Evelyn Moretti. She was dressed in ivory linen, her silver dark hair swept back from a face that had not softened with age so much as sharpened into confidence. There was beauty in her, yes, but more than that, presence. The kind that changed the temperature of a room before she ever spoke. Adrian's whole expression shifted when he looked at her. Not weakened, humanized. Ma. Evelyn came down the steps faster than a woman in low heels had any right to move, and cupped his face in both hands before kissing each cheek. My son. Finally. Then she drew back and looked at him with theatrical suspicion. You slept at all this week? Barely, Adrian said dryly. Good. It means you're invested. Olivia nearly laughed and caught herself at the last second. Evelyn turned to her then, all the force of that formidable attention landing at once. For one disorienting heartbeat, Olivia had the feeling of being read top to bottom, spine to pulse by someone who missed nothing and forgave little dishonesty. Then Evelyn's expression warmed. So she said, taking Olivia's hands into her own, You are the reason my son has been impossible to talk to for months. Olivia blinked. I'm sorry. Adrian made a low sound under his breath. Ma. Evelyn ignored him. Welcome, sweetheart. And before Olivia could decide what version of politeness the moment required, Evelyn drew her into a hug that smelled like vanilla expensive perfume and something startlingly familiar. Home, maybe, not hers. A version she had once imagined belonged to other people. Thank you for having me, Olivia managed. Evelyn drew back just enough to look at her face. Nonsense. We've been waiting for you. We. The word landed somewhere tender. Adrian took the suitcases from the driver, while Evelyn slipped an arm through Olivia's as if she had known her for years. Come, I'll show you inside before your sisters-in-law start pretending they don't want details. My sisters-ma, Adrian corrected. Details. Evelyn repeated louder this time, and Olivia heard the smile in her voice. The house was cooler inside, all polished wood floors, soft rugs, broad windows framing flashes of blue lake. Family photographs lined the walls in clusters. Children on docks, summer dinners, holiday gatherings. A younger Adrian with his arm around a laughing woman Olivia recognized instantly as Evelyn. Another photo with two dark-haired girls flanking him, all three still young enough to think adulthood could be delayed by charm. Olivia slowed in front of one black and white picture near the staircase. Adrian stood beside his father, younger and more severe than the others, both of them in dark suits. There was something in the angle of Adrian's shoulders, even then some early stiffness that made her chest tighten. Evelyn noticed where she was looking. That was his college graduation, she said, her voice gentler than before. His father was proud enough to burst and refused to show it like a civilized person. Olivia smiled softly. He looks almost happy. Almost, Evelyn agreed. Adrian came up behind them with the suitcases and caught the end of it. That is a slanderous interpretation of my face. It is the most charitable one available, Evelyn said. He looked at Olivia then, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that felt private despite the house around them. She followed Evelyn upstairs to a guest room overlooking the lake blue water cutting through green trees in flashes beneath the afternoon sun. The room itself was large, elegant, and quietly perfect in ways that made Olivia immediately conscious of every inexpensive apartment she had ever called home. Her bag looked modest near the antique wardrobe. Her shoes looked practical on the thick rug. Evelyn set Olivia's purse down on a dressing table and turned back to her. I hope you don't mind having your own room. Before Olivia could answer, Adrian spoke from the doorway. She can stay with me. The words arrived with such calm certainty that Olivia's pulse jumped. Evelyn lifted one perfectly shaped brow. She can survive a few nights under my roof without you hovering. Adrian leaned against the doorframe as if the outcome did not matter to him, which would have been more convincing if Olivia had not already learned the exact shape of his false indifference. I'm not hovering. No, Evelyn said. You are circling. Olivia looked down so no one could see her smile. Evelyn patted her hand. Rest for a bit. Dinner's at 7, just family tonight. When she swept out of the room, Adrian stayed behind. He set the final suitcase down near the wardrobe and turned to face Olivia fully. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Late afternoon light warmed the room gold. The house below hummed faintly with arrivals' doors voices the rhythm of a family preparing to gather. Well, Olivia said quietly, your mother is terrifying in a way I deeply respect. A smile, real this time, touched Adrian's mouth. She likes you. You say that like it's a surprise. It is, he said. She usually makes people earn a second breath. His gaze dropped to her face more slowly than it should have, taking in things no one else would think to notice. The loose strand of hair by her cheek, the way she held herself straight when she was nervous, the flush still high on her throat from the drive. You're here, he said, voice low enough to change the air. I am. His hands came to rest lightly at her waist, not enough to press enough to steady. I need you to know something. Her heart started beating harder before he said another word. This weekend is not performance for me anymore. She looked up at him. Adrian. No. He searched her face as if he were done letting silence do work that belonged to speech. I know what we said in Chicago. I know we agreed to take this one step at a time. But I am not bringing you into this house as a woman I'm testing out or trying on. I brought you here because you already matter. The honesty in him was becoming almost unbearable. Olivia touched the front of his shirt with careful fingers, the smallest answer she trusted herself to give. You matter too. He kissed her then, softly at first, one hand sliding into her hair, and whatever fear had followed her from the city loosened for one suspended minute. When he pulled back, his forehead rested briefly against hers. Come downstairs in half an hour, he murmured. I want to show you the lake before dinner. He left before she could ask him to stay, and Olivia stood in the center of the room with her suitcase still unopened, and both hands pressed lightly against her own racing heart. Half an hour later, she found him waiting near the back terrace in dark slacks and an open collar shirt turned once at the sleeves. Beyond him, the yard rolled down in manicured green toward a private stretch of shoreline where the lake flashed silver blue in the lowering sun. He held out his hand as if it had always belonged there. Olivia took it. He showed her the property without hurrying. The narrow stone path lined with lavender. The boathouse at the water's edge, where he and his sisters had hidden from summer storms as children. The old oak with a swing his father had hung for Nina and never managed to take down because Evelyn liked how it looked. The little garden behind the house where Evelyn still cut herbs every morning herself because she trusted no one with basil. At the dock, they stopped. The lake moved softly against the posts, its surface broken by light, and a breeze that carried the smell of water and cedar. I learned to swim here, Adrian said. Olivia looked at him, voluntarily. He gave her a brief sideways look. You continue to surprise me by how little respect you have for my dignity. I have respect. It just coexists with curiosity. His hand tightened once around hers. My father used to throw me in from the end of the dock. Said panic was temporary, but lessons learned in panic stuck. Olivia winced. That sounds mildly traumatic. He believed in practical education. And did it work? Adrian looked out over the water. On some subjects, there was enough in that answer to make her quiet. He glanced down at her a second later. What? You miss him. The wind moved between them. Yes, Adrian said the word simpler than she expected. More some years than others. But yes, she watched the lake a moment, then said, I think grief changes weather. Sometimes you stop feeling it in your chest and start feeling it in the room. His gaze shifted to her face, thoughtful and intent. That sounds like something only someone who has lived with it would say. I have. He stepped closer until their joined hands rested between them. "I'm glad you're here." The words should have felt small beside the house, the family, the history embedded in every wall. Instead, they felt larger than all of it. "So am I," she said. His mouth touched hers again, just once, the briefest stolen kiss under the open sky. Then, footsteps sounded behind them and a child's voice shouted, "I found them." Sophia's son ran down the path with all the reckless speed of a boy who had not yet learned how dangerous docks could be. Sophia followed at a more controlled pace, one arm around her daughter's shoulders. The little girl carried Bunny under one arm and looked much less haunted than she had in Chicago. Uncle Adrian, the boy, announced, "Mom says you're not allowed to hide the good wine from family." Adrian turned without dropping Olivia's hand. "Your mother has criminal instincts." Sophia came up smiling in that tired, beautiful way women sometimes smile when they have survived something and are not yet ready to discuss how. "My brother says hello by accusing me of theft. How charming." Her eyes moved to their linked hands, and then to Olivia's face. The corner of her mouth lifted. "Still here," she said. Olivia smiled back. "Still here. Good." Dinner gathered slowly. Nina and her husband arrived just before 7 in a burst of voices, energy, and the unmistakable presence of a woman who had never once entered a room quietly. Nina kissed Adrian hard on the cheek, hugged Olivia without warning, and stepped back to inspect them both. "This is annoying," she declared. Adrian sighed. "Hello to you too." Nina pointed between them. "You look right?" "I hate when he's right." Her husband laughed under his breath and took the wine bottle from her hand before she could gesture with it again. At the table, the family arranged itself with the ease of long practice. Evelyn at one end, Adrian at the other, until she waved him away and ordered him to sit beside Olivia, instead of pretending he had no preferences. Sophia, with the children near enough to intercept, dropped forks and overexcited questions. Nina half turned toward everyone at once, talking with her hands even when she was chewing. The food came in generous bowls, passed hand to hand. Roast chicken with lemon, pasta, salad with herbs from the garden, bread still warm enough to steam when torn open. Olivia had not sat at a family table like this in years, not with the layered noise of overlapping conversation and old jokes and tiny grievances polished into ritual. For the first half hour, she mostly listened, answering when spoken to, watching how they all moved around one another. Sophia said to Olivia, "So, tell me how my brother finally convinced you to tolerate him outside business hours." Adrian gave her a warning look. "I don't recall asking for commentary." "You exist in a permanent state of commentary," Nina said. "You just prefer when you're the one delivering it." Olivia took a sip of wine to hide her smile. "He's very persuasive." "That is one phrase for it," Nina muttered. The children giggled, as if none of this required context. Adrian's hand rested lightly against the back of Olivia's chair, his thumb occasionally brushing the bare skin above the fabric. Small touches, constant ones, quiet enough not to perform for the room, intimate enough that she felt each of them. Then Evelyn's sister Diane, who had so far contributed only pointed questions about weather and one disapproving look at Nina's second glass of wine, turned her attention to Olivia. "And what do your parents do, dear?" The table quieted almost imperceptibly. Olivia set down her fork. "They passed away when I was younger." A beat. Diane gave the delicate wince of someone who had walked into another person's wound and resented not being warned. "How sad." "Yes," Olivia said calmly. Diane folded her napkin more neatly beside her plate. "And now you work for Adrian." "I do." The older woman's expression changed in a way that was careful enough to be deniable. "It must be quite a leap. A young woman from a modest background finding herself in circles like these." The room went still. Adrian's posture changed before anyone else's, not visibly to someone who did not know him. Olivia knew him enough now to feel the warning gather in him like a storm front. But she answered first. "It's less a leap than you'd think," she said evenly. "People are usually themselves at every income level." Some are kind, some are rude. Some ask very personal questions over chicken. For half a heartbeat the silence held. Then Nina made a sound suspiciously like choking on suppressed laughter. Sophia looked down into her wine glass. Even Evelyn's mouth twitched. Diane stiffened. "I see." Olivia smiled softly. "I'm sure you do." Adrian did not look at Diane again for the rest of dinner. His hand found Olivia's beneath the table instead, fingers closing around hers with a pressure that said more than praise would have. Later, as coffee was poured, and the children were sent off to the den with a movie, Evelyn watched Olivia over the rim of her cup. "You hold your own beautifully," she said. Olivia felt heat creep up her neck. "Your sister was testing me. She tests everyone. It's how she pretends she's useful," Ma Adrian said. Evelyn waved one elegant hand. "Please, by 80, I will say much worse." Laughter moved around the table and loosened whatever remained of the tension. Afterward, when everyone drifted into smaller conversations, and the lake darkened beyond the windows, Adrian drew Olivia out to the terrace where strings of warm lights had already been woven through the trees for the next night's celebration. Night had settled over the water in deep blue layers. Music drifted faintly from inside. Behind them, family voices rose and fell through open doors. Adrian stood close enough that the warmth of him cut through the cool lake wind. "You handled that better than I would have," he said. "You would have been less polite." Considerably. Olivia looked out at the lights reflected on the water. "I'm not fragile, Adrian. I know." His voice lowered. "That doesn't mean I enjoy watching people aim for you." She turned toward him. "You make that sound personal." "It is." The honesty in him had become a kind of gravity. She could not step outside it even when she wanted to. He touched her cheek with the backs of his fingers. "You fit here." The words hit harder than she expected. Because she wanted them. Because some bruised part of her had arrived waiting to feel misplaced. Because the house, the table, the warmth of his mother's embrace, and the easy cruelty of Diane's question had all struck the same deep old fear from different angles. "I don't know if I do," she admitted. Adrian's eyes searched hers. "Then let me say it until you believe me." He kissed her there under the terrace lights, slow and sure, one hand at the side of her neck, the other drawing her closer by the waist. The world narrowed to warmth and lake wind and the quiet certainty of his mouth on hers. When he pulled back, his forehead brushed hers. "You're staying beside me tomorrow," he said softly. I thought that was implied. It was. A pause. I wanted to hear myself say it. The birthday party the next evening transformed the house. By sunset, the backyard had turned into something out of another life. White linen, lanterns hanging from the trees, a jazz quartet near the garden wall, waiters moving with trays of champagne through guests dressed in silk dark suits and old money confidence. The lake beyond it all shimmered under the last light like a stage set built by God with a weakness for drama. Olivia stood in front of her mirror upstairs and tried to remember how breathing worked. The dress Adrian had sent over earlier that afternoon lay against her skin like dark red wine poured into silk. It fit closely through the waist before falling clean over her hips. Not vulgar, not timid, beautiful in a way that made her think of women in old films who always seemed to know exactly what men would lose over them. She had pinned her hair up because he had once told her he liked seeing the line of her neck. A knock sounded at the door. "Come in." Adrian stepped inside and stopped. For one suspended second, he did not move at all. He wore black, of course. Black suit, white shirt, no tie. The simplicity made him look even more formidable, all hard lines and dark heat. But it was his face when he looked at her that took the air from her lungs. "Olivia," he said. Her hands tightened around the small clutch she was holding. Too much. He crossed the room slowly, eyes never leaving hers. Not remotely. From his pocket he drew a velvet box and opened it to reveal a delicate diamond pendant on a fine chain. "You bought me jewelry. I bought you something that belongs on you. Those are not the same thing." A faint smile touched his mouth. "Turn around." Her pulse thudded as she obeyed. Adrian stepped close behind her, lifting the chain over her head. His fingers brushed the back of her neck once, then again, as he fastened the clasp. Heat chased over her skin so sharply she had to grip the edge of the dressing table. "There," he murmured. When she turned back, he looked at her, not like a man admiring his date, but like a man trying not to say something too true too soon. "You're staring," she whispered. "I'm aware." From downstairs came the softened swell of voices. Doors opening. Glasses clinking. Laughter carried upward in waves. The house was filling. Adrian held out his hand. "Come with me." She took it, and together they went down to meet the night. Together they went down to meet the night. The party rose around them in a wash of candlelight and music. Lanterns swung softly from the trees. The jazz quartet moved through, something slow and elegant near the terrace, and the lake beyond the lawn held the last of the evening light like polished steel. Guests turned as Adrian and Olivia stepped into the garden, not all at once, but in small ripples of attention that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Except tonight, for the first time, Olivia felt some of that attention settle on her, too. Adrian did not leave her side. His hand rested at the small of her back as he guided her through introductions. Old family friends. Business associates with wives too polished to ever sweat. Cousins who looked at Adrian with equal parts affection and exasperation. Everyone seemed to know who she was before a word had been spoken. This must be Olivia. "So this is the woman. We have heard so much about you." That last one caught her more than once. Heard what exactly she wanted to ask. But every time she turned toward Adrian with the question in her eyes, he only looked faintly amused, as if he had been waiting for her to notice. A waiter passed with champagne. Adrian took 2 glasses and handed her one without asking. Their fingers brushed. He looked down at her, his gaze dark and steady in the lantern glow. "You're doing well," he murmured. "I feel like I'm in someone else's life." His hand pressed more firmly at her back, grounding. "No, you're in mine." The words warmed and frightened her at once. Across the lawn, Evelyn stood at the center of it all in a silver gown that caught the light every time she turned. She looked radiant and completely in command, accepting kisses and compliments with the serene confidence of a woman who had survived long enough to stop confusing attention with importance. When she spotted Adrian and Olivia together near the edge of the crowd, something in her expression softened into unmistakable satisfaction. Nina appeared out of nowhere with a glass in one hand and mischief in both eyes. "Mother has already cried twice." Adrian sighed. "From happiness or theatrics?" Nina smiled. "With her, those are the same thing." Sophia joined them a moment later, her daughter balanced sleepily on one hip, her son weaving around adults with the fearless instinct of a child who believed family gatherings made him untouchable. Sophia's gaze moved over Olivia and Adrian and settled on their linked hands. "You two look less fake every hour," she said. Olivia nearly laughed on the first beat and stopped on the second when she realized Sophia meant it kindly. Adrian took a sip of champagne. "Maybe that is because we're not trying anymore." Sophia held his gaze for one quiet moment and seemed to understand more than anyone had said aloud. She smiled slowly, then kissed Olivia's cheek before moving off to rescue her son from a decorative hedge and certain disaster. The quartet shifted into a slower number. Lantern light trembled over white tablecloths and crystal. The smell of cut roses and warm food floated through the air. Adrian leaned toward Olivia close enough that his breath grazed her temple. "Dance with me. There are people everywhere." Yes, that was not reassurance. He set his champagne aside without looking away from her. "Come here." She should have been used to the effect of that voice by now. She was not. She set down her own glass and let him lead her toward the open stretch of lawn near the terrace where a few other couples had already drifted together under the music. His hand settled at her waist. Her hand found his shoulder. Their fingers laced. He drew her in, and the rest of the party blurred. Olivia had danced with him in Chicago in a dark penthouse where the city had looked like another galaxy through the glass. This was different. The lake breeze moved over her skin. Laughter rose and fell nearby. Lanterns swayed in the trees. But the feeling of being in his arms remained the same, dangerous and strangely peaceful all at once. "You've been staring at me all evening," she said softly. "Have I?" "Yes." "What gave me away?" "The fact that I can feel it from across a crowd." His mouth curved. "Then I should pretend harder." "Can you number?" The honesty of it moved through her like a quiet flame. She tipped her head back just enough to study his face. "I still don't know what your mother sees when she looks at me." "Everything I do," Adrian said without hesitation. Her breath caught. Before she could answer, the music faded, and the clink of a spoon against crystal carried lightly across the garden. Conversation softened. Heads turned. Evelyn stood near the center of the lawn, one hand resting against her champagne flute, the other raised just high enough to command the room without begging for it. "My friends," she began, and even the children went quiet at the sound of her voice. "Thank you for being here tonight. 70 years is a ridiculous age to become elegant, but I've done my best." Laughter moved warmly through the crowd. "I have been fortunate in my life. I have loved and been loved. I have raised difficult children into mostly acceptable adults. I have seen enough seasons to know a woman should celebrate everyone she is given." Her gaze moved across the guests and then settled on Adrian. "And this year I have received an especially beautiful gift. My son has finally stopped behaving like an armed monastery." Nina made a sound suspiciously like cheering. More laughter followed. Evelyn lifted a hand toward Olivia. "And for that we thank this lovely woman." Applause broke out around them, warm and immediate. Heat rushed up Olivia's neck. Adrian's arm tightened around her waist. Then someone called from somewhere near the back, "Speech, Adrian." Several people took it up at once. "Speech." "He hates speeches," Nina announced with delight. "That is precisely why we need one," Evelyn said. Adrian exhaled once through his nose, a look passing over his face that Olivia recognized by now. The one that meant resistance was pointless, and he knew it. He set his glass on a tray as a waiter passed, then turned fully toward her. Before she understood what he meant to do, he took her hand and led her with him into the center of the garden. The world narrowed in a way that felt almost unreal. Lanterns, faces, music gone quiet, the lake dark and endless beyond the lawn. Olivia stood beside him in a circle of attention she had never wanted, and suddenly could not imagine enduring without him. Adrian looked at the crowd first, but only briefly. Then he looked at Olivia, and stayed there. "Most of you know I do not enjoy public speaking," he said. His voice carried easily low and controlled the voice of a man used to rooms listening when he decided they would. Mostly because most things worth saying matter more to the person hearing them than to the people watching. The crowd quieted further. "When Olivia Bennett came into my office 2 years ago, I thought I was hiring someone efficient, organized, calm under pressure." A faint smile touched his mouth. "I was right about all of that. What I did not understand was that I was also meeting the only woman I would ever trust enough to let close to every messy part of my life." Olivia forgot how to breathe. Adrian's thumb moved once over the back of her hand. "She saw me at my best and my worst. She handled what I gave her with more grace than I deserved. She stood beside my family when they needed help without asking what it would cost her. And somewhere in all of that, she stopped being the person who worked for me and became the person I looked for in every room." A soft murmur moved through the guests, but Olivia barely heard it over the rush of blood in her ears. Adrian's gaze never left her face. "I asked her to help me sell a lie," he said more quietly now. "What I did not say then, because I was a coward and called it caution, was that I had already been in love with her for longer than I knew what to do with." The words hit her so hard her vision blurred. A sound rose somewhere in the crowd. A startled laugh. Evelyn's hand over her mouth. Nina making absolutely no effort to hide that she was crying. Adrian took one half-step closer. "Olivia," he said, and now nothing in his voice belonged to the room around them. "I love you. Completely. Without reason, without restraint, and without any wish to be saved from it. If there is a future in me worth having, it belongs with you." Tears spilled before she could stop them. She hated crying in public. She hated it. And yet, here she was on a summer lawn in Lake Geneva with a man the city feared looking at her as if she were the most precious truth of his life. He lifted one hand to her cheek and wiped away a tear with the pad of his thumb. "Say something," he murmured, and there was the faintest tremor under the steadiness of it. Olivia laughed through tears because if she did not laugh, she would break. "I love you too," she said, voice shaking. "So much it scares me." Something bright and almost disbelieving moved across his face. "Good," he whispered. "It should." Then he kissed her. The applause and cheers that followed were distant, blurred at the edges by the heat of his mouth and the steady hold of his hand at her waist. When he finally drew back, Evelyn was openly crying into a linen napkin, while Sophia smiled through tears of her own, and Nina looked as if she might start planning a wedding before dessert. The rest of the evening moved around Olivia in golden fragments. Dancing, laughter, congratulations. Adrian refusing to let anyone keep her from his side for more than a few minutes at a time. At some point, he fed her a bite of cake under the table, like they were the only two people left awake in the world. At another, he stood behind her with his arm wrapped low around her waist, while Evelyn showed them old family photographs on her phone and commented mercilessly on Adrian's hair at 17. By the time the last guests began to leave and the quartet packed away the final notes of the night, Olivia's cheeks hurt from smiling, and her heart felt too full to fit inside her body. Adrian walked her upstairs himself. Outside her room, the house had gone mostly quiet. Somewhere down the hall, a door closed softly. The lake beyond the windows was black now, lit only by strips of moonlight and the distant shimmer of boats. He stopped in front of her door and looked at her for a long moment, as if the sight of her still in that dress, still wearing his pendant, still flushed from the night, was something he was trying to memorize. "You all right?" he asked softly. She laughed under her breath. "No, but in a way I think I want to stay." His hand came to rest at the side of her neck. That speech was not for the room. "I know. This weekend is not temporary. I know." He kissed her once, slow and deep enough to make the floor feel less certain beneath her feet. When he pulled back, his forehead rested briefly against hers. "Sleep," he murmured. "You say that like either of us will." A low laugh left him. "Fair." He started to step away. Olivia caught his wrist. "Adrian." He looked at her. "Thank you for telling the truth." Something in his face softened in a way she thought might ruin her for every other expression a man could make. "I should have done it sooner." She shook her head. "You did it when you could." He kissed her forehead and left, before she could ask him not to. The drive back to Chicago the next afternoon was quieter than the one that had brought them there. Not awkward. Full. The kind of quiet built on too much having already been said to require constant proof. Olivia sat angled toward the window, one hand tucked into Adrian's, watching the lake recede behind them into strips of blue and green. Every now and then he lifted her joined fingers to his mouth and kissed the back of her hand as if it were no more remarkable than breathing. At one point, somewhere past the state line, she said, "What happens now?" He did not pretend to misunderstand. At work, in the city, in reality. He studied the road ahead. "Whatever protects you." She turned toward him. "And what do you want?" A small pause. "I want not to hide you," he said. "But I will not make your life harder so I can feel honest more comfortably." The answer moved through her like relief. Back in Chicago, real life did not wait politely for romance to adjust. Monday arrived with inboxes, meetings, and reception staff very carefully not asking questions they absolutely wanted to ask. Adrian kept his word. In the office, he was composed, professional, impossible to read to anyone but her. But the private moments became their own current under the day. His hand brushing the small of her back when no one was looking. The way his voice changed on her name when the door to his office clicked shut. The texts that arrived 10 times a day for no practical reason at all. "Have you eaten? You left your notebook in my office. I can see you through the glass, and this is becoming a problem. At night, he took her out into the city as if he were learning it again with her beside him. Quiet dinners in places with no photographers. A jazz bar in River North where he sat with one arm along the back of her chair and watched her laugh like it was his favorite private vice. Walks along the river after dark. Sunday mornings in his penthouse kitchen with him making espresso and Olivia leaning against the counter in one of his shirts trying to remember when exactly his home had started feeling less like borrowed luxury and more like a place she could exhale. He met Mia 3 weeks after the lake. Olivia had expected suspicion and got something closer to cross-examination. Mia, thinner than she should have been but bright-eyed and impossible to charm, cheaply looked Adrian over, from polished shoes to expensive watch, and said, "So this is the man who has my sister forgetting to text back." Adrian took the hit without blinking. "That sounds unlike her," it is Mia said, which suggests severe distraction. Olivia wanted to die quietly on the spot. Adrian only smiled. He won Mia over slowly, which was the only way that would ever have mattered. Not with money. Not first. With presence. With the fact that he drove them both to a specialist appointment and sat in a hard plastic waiting room for 2 hours without once checking how much time it cost him. With the way he listened when Mia talked about treatment like she was a person, not a problem. By the time he quietly arranged for a second consult with one of the best specialists in the city, Mia was already half gone. 6 weeks after the party, Adrian took Olivia to a small Italian restaurant tucked on a side street where the windows were dim, and no one important ever seemed to come in unless they were trying not to be recognized. He looked too calm. Olivia set down her menu. "What?" One brow lifted. "That is an aggressive opening. You have a face you wear before saying difficult things. I have many faces. This one is the problem." A smile threatened and then disappeared. Adrian reached across the table and took her hand. "There's something I never told you," he said. Her pulse changed. "When I asked you to come to Lake Geneva," he continued, "the lie was real enough. My mother did think I was seeing someone, but that was not the real reason I asked you." Olivia held his gaze and waited. The restaurant sounds blurred softly around them. Glasses, cutlery. Quiet conversation from strangers whose lives did not matter in this moment. Adrian's thumb moved over her knuckles. "The truth is, I was already in love with you," he said. "I had been for months, maybe longer. I just did not trust myself enough to say it cleanly. I told myself if I could have 1 week with you, even under false terms, I would get it out of my system." Olivia stared at him. His mouth curved, tired and self-aware. That was in retrospect extremely stupid. A laugh broke out of her before she could stop it, tangled with tears so fast she hardly knew which came first. "Adrian, I know. You absolute idiot. That is also fair." She shook her head once, overwhelmed by the reckless tenderness of him. "I thought I was the only one being ruined by that arrangement." His gaze deepened. "No, sweetheart. I was ruined long before the paperwork." The endearment undid something in her. He reached into his jacket and took out a small velvet box. Olivia's breath caught. "What are you doing?" "Not proposing," he said, "yet." He opened the box. Inside lay a slim diamond band, elegant and understated, and somehow more intimate than anything louder would have been. "This is a promise," he said, "that I am done wasting time because fear once taught me the wrong lessons. That when I ask you for forever, it won't be a surprise, and that every day until then I intend to love you in ways that leave no room for doubt." Olivia pressed her lips together against the sudden burn in her throat. "You really don't do anything halfway." "Number." He held her gaze. "Will you wear it?" She held out her hand. He slid the ring onto her finger with a care so deliberate it felt almost holy. Then he lifted her hand to his mouth and kissed it. 3 months later, winter put Lake Geneva under snow. The house was brighter in December windows glowing gold against the cold evergreen garlands twined along the railings, a lake beyond the trees hard and silver under a pale sky. Mia came this time 2 stronger than she had been in years, wrapped in one of Evelyn's cashmere scarves, and laughing with Nina in the kitchen, while Sophia's children ran through the halls pretending the world had not always scared them. On Christmas morning, Adrian asked Olivia to walk with him down to the dock. Snow pressed softly under their boots. The air was sharp enough to sting her lungs. He wore a dark wool coat and leather gloves and still somehow looked like the most dangerous man she had ever loved. At the edge of the frozen water, he turned to face her. For a moment, he said nothing, only looked at her in the quiet white world around them, as if he could still hardly believe she was real. "I loved you before I knew what to call it," he said at last. "I loved the way you fought for people, the way you stood upright in storms, the way you never looked at me and saw only the worst thing people had said. I loved you before I had earned the right to ask for any of this." Her eyes burned instantly in the cold. Adrian took both her hands in his gloved ones. "I want every season with you. The loud ones and the broken ones. The ordinary mornings, the impossible nights, the family, the work, all of it. And then there in the snow with the lake behind him, and the house waiting warm in the distance, Adrian Moretti went down on one knee. Olivia covered her mouth with one shaking hand. He pulled out a ring box and opened it. "Marry me," he said. "No speech now, no performance, just the truth in its simplest form. Let me spend the rest of my life proving I deserve the chance you gave me." She was crying before he finished the sentence. "Yes," she whispered. Then, louder, broken by laughter and tears, all at once. "Yes." He stood and slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that were only slightly less steady than hers. Then he gathered her into his arms and kissed her in the cold until the world blurred at the edges, and all Olivia could feel was joy, deep and bright and impossible. When they walked back toward the house hand in hand, the ring flashed once in the winter light. Evelyn saw it first through the window and let out a cry that sent half the family running before they even reached the door. Inside, warmth and noise swallowed them whole. Nina screamed. Sophia cried. Mia threw her arms around Olivia, and then Adrian in the same breath. Evelyn took Adrian's face in both hands exactly as she had on the front steps that first day, and said with tears shining openly, "Now I knew it." "Of course you did," Adrian said. Later, when the house had quieted and the fire burned low, and Olivia sat curled against Adrian on the long sofa with her hand turned, so the ring caught the light, he kissed her temple and said softly, "Best strange request I ever made." She smiled against his shoulder. What started as a lie, she murmured, turned out to be the truest thing either of us had. His arm tightened around her. Outside, snow fell over the lake. Inside the house held family warmth, laughter rising from another room, and the steady beat of a future that had once seemed impossible. Olivia looked up at the man beside her, the one who had changed her life with one impossible sentence on a rainy Chicago night, and thought that sometimes love did not arrive gently. Sometimes it looked you in the eye and said, "Starting today, everything changes." And sometimes, if you were brave enough to say yes, it changed into forever.